Hey everyone, I'm getting ready to start cutting up some deer here, and I wanted to take a quick minute and talk to you about a very hot topic right now, and that's the proper aging of your wild game animal. Now I'm going to go ahead and open up our Koola portable walk-in here. I'm going to unzip it the whole way, and we're going to open up the door. You can see inside here we've got some trim meat down here in a pan. Should have that up on a rack, but I don't. We've actually got 3 deer hanging in here, and I want to explain to you exactly what's happening during the aging process. Now this first deer here, this deer's actually been hanging for 2 weeks. So this deer's been in here for 2 weeks now, and you can see how dark this deer is starting to get on the outside. It's getting really dry on the outside of it here, so you can see that what's occurring here to this deer is it's drying out. Now here in the back, we've got another deer here. Now this is a buck, and this buck has been hanging in there for about 10 days now. So you can see how it's starting to darken up on the outside here, and it doesn't have any fat on it. We're gonna talk about that in a moment as well. And now here's another deer here, and this one's actually been hanging in here for 7 days. So you can see the difference between 7 days and 14 days. You can see the aging here that's occurring between 7 days and 14 days. Now with all that being said, I'm gonna go ahead and zip this back up here, and I'm going to explain to you exactly what's going on. Now when you're aging a wild game animal, there's 2 very important factors that are taking place. Number 1, you're evaporating that carcass, the body carcass, the moisture that's inside that carcass, you're evaporating that out of the inside of the animal. Now that carcass moisture, that's not what you think about when you say, oh, I don't want my steaks to be dry. That comes from marbling, and that can only come from fat content, so it's a totally different thing. When you're evaporating that body moisture out of the carcass, a lot of times that body moisture can be what gives your wild game animal kind of that off flavor. You know, we've all field dressed an animal on a cool winter morning, and you open that animal up and all that heat comes up out of there, that body heat comes out of it. Well, if you take and inhale a real big deep breath, it doesn't taste very good. So we want to get that body moisture to evaporate out of the carcass, and that's what happens during the aging process. That's number 1. Number 2 is, without getting into a big in-depth detail about it, the pH level of the meat starts to change. That's the easiest way to describe it. When you harvest an animal, they basically have a neutral pH of 7.0. After that animal hangs and begins to age, the pH level starts to rise. That breaks down the muscle proteins, gives you a more tender product. So by letting the body moisture come out of the carcass, you're changing the flavor, and by letting the pH level rise, breaking down the proteins, you're making a more tender product. Now, here comes the magic number. What is the perfect amount of time to age your wild game animal? As I was saying, you can see we've got 3 different carcasses hanging in here, all aged for different amounts of time. Now, if you've got fat on the outside of that carcass, you can age it a little bit longer without getting so much waste. Very important. When you have a lean animal like that buck in there, you can't age them as long because you're going to get a lot more waste. Now the USDA has defined proper aging by saying, okay, you should age 3 days for every 100 pounds of carcass weight. Hence the fact when you go into a Ruth Chris Steakhouse or Morton's, some popular steakhouse, oftentimes it'll say on the menu that our steaks are dry aged a full 21 days to ensure tenderness. What they're basing that off of is that if a finished steer, a carcass, a beef carcass, weighs 700 pounds, 3 days for every 100 pounds would be 21 days, correct? And they want you to age that animal at 41 degrees or below. We'll get to proper aging temperatures here in just a moment. So that's where they get that from. So over that period of time, that duration of time, that's the same exact thing. You're allowing that body moisture to come out of that beef carcass or out of that deer carcass. You're allowing that body moisture to come out. It takes a specific amount of time to do that. 3 days for every 100 pounds. And it's the same way with changing that pH level and dropping that down, breaking down the enzymes and making a more tender product. So 3 days for every 100 pounds. Depending on how fat the animal is, you can age them a little bit longer. Depending on how lean they are, you might want to not age them quite as long, because now you get into a waste factor. The longer you age them, like that one deer that's been hanging in there for 2 weeks, I'm going to have a lot of dark trim on the outside of that. Now the meat could maybe not be better, but I got to have a lot of waste that I'm going to have to trim off the outside of that and throw away. So that's what you get. You know, there's a give and take. The longer you age, maybe the more tender the meat becomes, the more body moisture evaporates out, changing the flavor. but you also have more waste. So there's a fine line there. But if you're talking about a deer carcass, let's say it weighs 150 pounds, proper aging on that deer carcass would be about 5 to 7 days. I left these animals go a little bit longer just to show you, and this is the first time that we've ever had, like 3 deer hanging like that were harvested at different times, that I could actually lay this out and show it to you. So I really wanted to share that with you now about the proper aging. Now, what happens if you take that animal, and I get people that ask me this all the time, well, can I just quarter it up and throw it in an ice chest? Okay, well, let's say we quarter that animal up and we throw it in an ice chest. What happens to the body moisture? It can't get out of the ice chest. What happens to the heat? Okay, so you just throw a bunch of bags of ice in there. Now you've got heat, you've got moisture, you've got all that water in there. You're basically making a cesspool for bacteria. And I do know there's some folks out there that do that. Fine and dandy. But if you let that animal set in that ice chest, that body heat cannot get out of that chest. So it's not doing as well, it's not doing as good a job. Whereas if you're in a walk-in cooler like this, where it's sucking that body moisture out, it's pulling it across the cooling coils, and it's actually removing that body heat and moisture from that carcass, it's a lot different issue. And then I have people say, well, I'm just gonna toss it into a freezer. So if you take that whole carcass and you toss it into a freezer, now you've frozen that body moisture in the carcass. You've stopped the pH level from dropping because you've frozen it, so therefore the aging process can't take place. So the best way to age your animal, and I do know that sometimes it can be difficult, but the best way to age your animal is at 41 degrees or below. The lower temperature you go, the slower the aging process is going to occur, because you're slowing down that pH level. The pH isn't rising as fast. So we got a lot of different variables there, but I just wanted to take a moment, explain that to you. If you have any questions, feel free to post them at the bottom, and I'll be happy to answer each and every one of your questions.